we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is time for a Tuesday night live stream from kind of grim Budapest, where the post-Orban era is now in full swing, and Peter Magyar, the prime minister designate, is naming his team, and one of the leading figures on the team is Anita Orban, who is no relation to uh, Viktor Orban, no relation to Balázs Orban, who is also no relation to Viktor Orban, but who is also the political director, outgoing political director for Viktor Orban. So, as you can see, there's a certain lack of names in Hungary. There's they tend to repeat themselves over and over again. But anyway, Anita Orban has been named as the new foreign minister in place of Peter Szijjártó, about whom we've talked many times, and she really rose to prominence. I mean, she had been part of the Fidesz apparat, but she big, became notable. She spent a lot of time in the United States. She spent a lot of time in the corporate sector, but she in LNG. But nonetheless, she became most prominent as an advocate against Russia and Russian energy, use of Russian energy. So she's best known for a book that she wrote, I think in 2008. Obviously, very much when she was in tune with the with the mood of the time, which was the horror of dependence on Russian energy. So this was her book. Here, this power, you can get a sense of what she's about from the title: Power, Energy, and the New Russian Imperialism. And that was the time when there was a lot of preoccupation with Russia supposedly cutting off gas to Ukraine. It didn't. The issue was that Ukraine wasn't paying its bills, and Ukraine was sort of siphoning off gas for its own uses. In any case, that was. But there was a lot of talk at the time about the ghastliness of becoming dependent on Russian gas, and but of course the other conclusion drawn wasn't that way with the terrible Russian imperialism, but that if Europe were to continue to receive Russian gas, then it would have to bypass Ukraine, and that led, of course, to the building of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines. It was a way to do it, avoiding Ukraine, because Ukraine was obviously stealing the gas, and this made delivery of gas unreliable. And the Germans said, well, why do we have to have the pipelines going through Ukraine? Why can't we just have it under the Baltic Sea? And that led, of course, to the building of the Nord Stream pipelines, which, of course, then was destroyed by maybe the United States by itself, but maybe by the United States and Ukraine together. And so here's a book, as you can see. All of it is just simply a kind of a preoccupation with the terrible nature of this of dependence on Russian gas. So that is going to be her thing, and of course it's of a piece with the move on the part of Magyar Péter to remove Russian influence, whatever it is, from Hungary. Now, if you follow events in Hungary, you might have heard that today the European Court of Justice issued a ruling about, yes, the LGBTQ plus whatever issue, because if you recall, one of the um, primary lines of attack on Orban's Hungary had been its supposed um, intolerance and enmity towards LGBTQ rights. And but what the issue that had arisen was that Hungary had banned what it deemed LGBTQ propaganda in its state schools, so that any sex education classes would not feature LGBTQ material, and then also on state television, there would be no LGBTQ material until after 10 p.m. As a result, the EU got in on the act, and they were shocked, horrified. It was, an endless, vociferous campaign against Orban's Hungary, um, and not just the European Commission that brought a lawsuit against Hungary, but other EU member states joined in. But anyway, this legal action took some time, and then finally today, the European Court of Justice issued its devastating, really devastating ruling against Hungary. So just in time for Orban's departure. But, and here's the significant point, it's a message to Magyar. So in other words, now the Magyar is the new prime minister. He has to show that he is indeed turning his back on Orbanism, and he has to implement this ruling. Because if Orban had been prime minister, Orban would have just ignored the ruling, just as he's ignored other rulings in the past, particularly on the issue of immigrants. And so I said, okay, fine. I mean, we're not going to do anything. But now this ruling has come with a menacing tone, said to Magyar, hey, you have to show us that you are serious about drawing a line in the sand against the Orban pass. So here's the story that appeared today in Politico. That's where are we? Just all right. Let me just find this. I thought it was okay. That this is it. Okay. So yeah, here we are. Yeah, this is the story in Politico. As you can see, EU top court strikes down Hungary's anti-LGBTQ plus rules. And then Viktor Orban had banned mentions of homosexuality in media accessible to children and outlawed pride marches. And then it says Hungary violated EU law when it banned children from accessing LGBTQ plus content. The Court of Justice of the European Union ruled Tuesday, ordering Budapest to scrap the legislation. The landmark judgment marks a blow to outgoing Prime Minister Viktor Orban's legacy as his longtime rival Péter Magyar prepares to take office next month. And then here's the BBC story. Unprecedented, of course, it's unprecedented ruling finds Hungary's anti-LGBTQ laws in breach of EU values. The European Union's top court has ruled that Hungarian anti-LGBTQ laws violate EU rules and infringe its values of equality and minority rights. The laws were brought in by Viktor Orban's government in 2021 and ban so-called promotion of homosexuality or gender change to under 18s, arguing it violated child protection laws. And then the ECJ ruled that the Hungarian law interfered with rights such as a ban on discrimination based on sex and sexual orientation, respect for private and family life, and freedom of expression and information. The law also stigmatized and marginalized people who were transgender or not heterosexual and associated them with people convicted of pedophilia. And then it says the European Commission said the anti LGBTQ law would be one of the issues it would be taking up with the new government once it was in place. Well, of course. And then here with their quoting spokeswoman Paula Pino, it's up to the Hungarian government to abide by the ruling. And once that is done, the issue is solved. And then here's the Guardian, also the top court finds that. And then the Guardian said that the law was discriminatory, stigmatizing, and in breach of basic democratic values, setting up an early test for the incoming government when it takes power next month. In a wide-ranging judgment, the European Court of Justice said that the 2021 law was at odds with a society based on pluralism and fundamental rights, such as prohibition of discrimination and freedom of expression. And then the judgment paves the way for future cases against EU member states that systematically flout basic values on democracy and the rule of law. Now, this is, of course, very interesting because nothing here has anything to do with democracy or the rule of law because, well, this decision on the part of the Hungarian government was democratically arrived at. It was a democratically elected government, and with a very substantial majority in parliament that passed a law. That's the way democracy works. And there was no rule of law issue involved since that is what the rule of law means. So what the EU is really saying, and then here, you get into this, the way you get courts essentially superseding democracy. In other words, the courts, judges, the legal profession, is arrogantly declaring that they are far better placed, they're far more intelligent to decide almost all issues than are voters. And as you've seen, this sort of now the EU parades, has all its building, this giant notice democracy. And as you can see, that's the last thing the EU is about is democracy. What it does is create a kind of a gobbledygook in which it uses all sorts of vague terms. Well, obviously democracy, rule of law, kind of vague terms, and obviously they mean the opposite of what democracy and rule of law actually mean, because nothing says rule of law violation as much as overturning a legal democratic procedure by courts, not even courts based in the country concerned, but somehow international courts just sort of floating in the ether. We don't quite know what exactly their basis in authority really is. So if you look at let me just show you this ruling, the kind of meaningless verbiage that comprises this ruling by the EU's top court. So here is, see. So here, if you look at it, it says the court finds that is not the situation in the present case. Indeed, the aspects of the amending law, this is the law that was passed by the Hungarian parliament, the aspects of the amending law which are based on the criterion of the portrayal or promotion of deviation from the self identity corresponding to the sex assigned at birth, of gender reassignment, or of homosexuality are based on the premise that any portrayal or promotion of that kind, whatever its specific content, is such as to be detrimental to the best interests of the child. Now, that is a decision that was made on the part of elected representatives. They can make that decision. You can disagree with it. Everyone's free to disagree with it, but nonetheless, issues of education, issues of family should be left to democratically accountable authorities. And that's the point, that when it comes to in matters like education, like public health, like family promotion, which is what the Hungarian government was very big on during the Orban years, then those are local matters. They're not to be decided on by international bureaucrats or international judges. So say this to them, this is the court is appalled by the decision that the Hungarian authorities think that they know better what is detrimental to the best interest of the child. No, that's not your responsibility. We take on this responsibility. And so here is this is what the court says. Such an approach reveals a preference for certain identities and sexual orientations to the detriment of others, which are stigmatized as a result, which is incompatible with the requirements flowing in a society in which pluralism prevails, from the prohibition on discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation. So again, you just read this carefully. It reveals a preference for certain identities and sexual orientations to the detriment of others, which are stigmatized as a result, which is incompatible with the requirements of flowing in a society in which pluralism prevails, from the prohibition on discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation. Now, the thing is that governments have a reasonable and a legitimate interest in promoting families. It's families, particularly in there's a very good argument to be made on behalf of families as the fundamental units of society, that a policy that promotes families promotes social stability. Social stability is something that is desirable. Governments have a legitimate interest in promoting social stability. Nobody's ever suggested anything otherwise, that somehow that's not a legitimate governmental interest, and that governments have that interest in promoting marriage, promoting the creation of families. And what the Hungarian government did was part and parcel of a policy that also involved the preference for families that had more children over families that had fewer children, and certainly families that had no children. Now, again, you can say you don't like that policy, fine, but nonetheless, it was a democratically elected government, and it made clear that one of its most important policies will be the promotion of families that have more children, and therefore the families that had more children got all kinds of tax breaks. That was discrimination. Why does this family get these tax breaks and why doesn't this family get no tax breaks? Well, we got a tax breaks because they have children. So if this family that has 3 children, it gets is looked upon more favorably by the government than a family that has 2 children. That's discrimination, but nonetheless, it's no one can deny that it's a legitimate governmental interest. The government wants to promote population growth. Hungary, like most countries in Europe, has a population dearth. Basically, it has more, more burials every year than christenings. More people die than are born in Hungary, and it's a legitimate governmental interest to promote the more rather than fewer children. So this is part of the Hungarian governmental policy. Now this obviously doesn't please the EU because the EU decides, well, we don't like all this discrimination. But why don't you like the discrimination? Discrimination is at the heart of any kind of policy. You favor one kind of conduct over another, and that's what the Hungarian government does. So when they start, oh well, this is really we believe that somehow the LGBTQ lifestyle is the same as the non-LGBTQ lifestyle. Well, you can absolutely think that, and you can sit in Brussels and believe that that's the case. But why should the Hungarian government believe that? I mean, particularly that's not what the Hungarian people believe. The Hungarian people always supported that policy that the government implemented, namely, well, we don't really want any of this LGBTQ stuff in state schools. State schools. In other words, they're funded by taxpayers. And we don't want this. We don't want our children to be exposed to this. They can be exposed to it after they leave school, but we don't want them exposed to it in school. I mean, there's nothing unreasonable about that, but obviously Brussels deems it wholly unreasonable. No, you can't possibly discriminate. Um, and here then, this ruling goes on. So, in view of such failure, to respect the essence of that prohibition, and this is prohibition, the prohibition on discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation, in view of such a failure, to respect the essence of that prohibition, the restrictions at issue do not appear to be justified under any circumstances by, inter alia, the objective of promoting the best interests of the child. Why not? I mean, obviously, if you ask, most most all Hungarian parents, do you want your child to be exposed to material that seems to promote LGBTQ lifestyles? Do you want them? They'll all say no. We absolutely don't want this. The court specifies that minors may be adequately protected against programs which are not age appropriate without there being direct discrimination in that regard based on sex and sexual orientation, such as that resulting from the amendments at issue. And then he goes on. Second, those amendments constitute a particularly serious interference with several fundamental rights protected by the Charter, namely the prohibition on discrimination based on sex or sexual orientation, respect for private and family life, and the freedom of expression and information. Now, this is all, nonsense. Because, first of all, the issue of freedom of expression and information has never applied to children. Yeah, there's freedom of expression when it comes to adults, but there's no freedom of expression when it comes to children. You know, children are minors. They are under the care, under the supervision of adults until such time as they reach the age of majority, and then they can enjoy freedom of expression. But children don't have freedom of expression, and teachers don't have freedom of expression when children are in their care. So that of course it's already is wrong. It's also very important to just keep in mind, this despite the hysteria that's implicit within this EU ruling. Keep in mind, Hungary, does not ban homosexuality. I mean, there's no ban here. I mean, even Hungary, while it doesn't recognize gay marriage, it does recognize civil unions, and even this the ban on LGBTQ material on public television, it only applies to um, television programs up until 10 p.m. In other words, while children are up, there's no ban on this material after 10 p.m. But the main thing is that this should still all be decided by um, Hungarians, or in any other country, Poles in Poland or whatever. Why is a judge weighing in on this? Why is a judge second guessing the wishes of the the people of Hungary? But this is how you reach this situation. Of course, we've seen it in the United States, whereby you minimize and, in fact, eliminate democracy by creating a special class of people, particularly judges, because judges essentially they're not accountable to anyone. They master a particularly esoteric um, language that most people find very difficult to follow, let alone understand. They master it, and they can just simply, manipulate words, twist words out of their meaning, and then make their rulings overturning what people had assumed would be the final decision, namely the decision of the voters. So no, well, the decision of the voters don't matter. We matter. We're the judges. We're the arbiters of what's right and wrong. Um, and so when you look at this kind of language, that you can see how they just simply there's the arrogance in which they say, namely, the prohibition on discrimination based on sex and sexual orientation. There really isn't, as I said, the discrimination is one in which a government says, well, we do discriminate on behalf of families that in one case is obviously families that are based on a man and a woman, but even they discriminate even more on families that have children. That's they say that's a legitimate governmental interest. What is the interest here on the part of Brussels, other than a kind of a very vague invocation of discrimination without really providing any serious content about, so what is it that is discriminated against, and why is it that why should that be something that's reprehensible to such an extent that you overturn the wishes of of a democratic government and the wishes of the Hungarian people. The wishes, incidentally, that Peter Magyar, who just won this huge victory, Peter Magyar has never challenged any of that. He was obviously has been asked, as is uh, as he, as is always likely, he was asked, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? He's always was very careful to maintain a studied silence on these issues because he knows that he would be very unpopular and would be in danger of losing an election if he started saying, well, yeah, I think absolutely we should ban discrimination against LGBTQ material in public schools. And then here we have, and here's a one wonderful piece of language. In particular, the Hungarian legislation at issue stigmatizes and marginalizes non-cisgender persons. Imagine a judge writing like this. It stigmatizes and marginalizes non-cisgender persons. Notice how it says stigmatizes and marginalizes. We don't even know what that means. Is it taking legal action against them? Is it saying that such people cannot be employed? That such people are not entitled to housing or anything like that? Is it taking any action at all against them? It isn't. But they can then present it, oh, well, it's stigmatizing and marginalizing. And we get to decide what is stigmatizing and marginalizing, even though there really isn't. It's just simply a matter of saying, well, we don't think this is appropriate material for people who are underage. So stigmatizes and marginalizes non-cisgender persons, including transgender persons or non-heterosexual persons, as being detrimental to the physical, mental, and moral development of minors solely on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. The title of amending law associates these persons with persons convicted of pedophilia. Which it's not that it isn't, of course. It's not. It doesn't at all associate them with pedophilia. That's just simply made up. They made that up as saying that what the issue was, why they frame it in that way. What the issue here is that the government, not unreasonably said, well, we need to protect children from pedophiles, from any predators, and not unreasonably said we think that there's something unhealthy, unwholesome about adults presenting such material, LGBTQ material, material about transgender and so on, presenting such material to people who are underage. So, which basically we should essentially protect children. If parents want to teach their children this material, no one is stopping them. That's very important to keep in mind. According to that legislation, if a mother and a father want to present their children with this sort of stuff, fine, go ahead, do it. No one is going to stop you. And the issue was this has no place in public schools, and it should not be strangers. And I think most parents would probably think, I don't really want a strange person, a strange adult, talking about these things with my child. I don't want them presenting very unwholesome pictures to my children. It's like, I want to protect my children. I don't want, other grown-ups doing this kind of thing to my children. And that was so. No, when they call about, oh, this is discrimination. Well, then no one is stopping parents teaching their children this material. The issue was what was going on in the public schools. Anyway, just to finish this off, and so it says a person of pedophilia. So that was well, the reason pedophilia says like I don't know. It just there's something odd about a grown up leafing through very unwholesome books in front of my child, and I think I want to protect my child from that. And as anyway, and then it goes on. In those circumstances, the interference at issue undermine the essence of the fundamental rights referred to above, and cannot therefore be justified by the objectives relied on by Hungary, namely the promotion of the best interests of the child and the rights of parents to ensure the education and teaching of their children in conformity with their religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions. And then the court also finds that in the present case, Hungary has acted in breach of the right to human dignity. Well, whatever the right to human dignity, one would have thought if you want the right to human dignity, then parents maintaining their authority over their children, the parents deciding what kind of material their children would be exposed to, that is a right to human dignity. And but they throw around these things like human dignity, the concept of self, of the right to define one's existence. I mean, they come up with absolutely meaningless terms. And then this results from the fact that the aspects of the amending law contested by the Commission treat a group of persons forming the integral part of society in which pluralism prevails as a threat to society, meriting special legal treatment solely on the basis of their gender identity or sexual orientation, and so on. Now, what is very interesting, so here they are, having basically made this declaration. No, parents don't have a right to protect their children. We, teachers, complete strangers have a right to present any material they like before minors. Right. So then they declare that. Then they announce that democratic governments have no right to decide on their education and family policy. So that's that. In the meantime, you've got the EU that adopts the things like the Digital Services Act and adopts ever more draconian censorship decisions, and it justifies those kinds of decisions on the basis that yes, we have to protect the children. So that's the official ideology. That well, how do you justify the censorship? Well, we have to protect the children. So on the one hand, the court rules that well, you can't protect your children. We decide what's good for your child. Parents don't get to decide that. We decide what's good for your child. But we also have the right to impose censorship. We have the right to send people to prison. We have the right to impose huge, ludicrous fines on social media companies, about 6% of global revenue, because they refuse to kowtow to our demands that they censor. We can do all of that. And what's the justification? We can't really justify it by saying, well, which is the correct position. We censor the views of people we don't like. But instead of admitting that, they say, well, we have to protect the children. When what was the gravamen of their charges against Pavel Durov? the founder of Telegram. Well, we have to protect the children. They keep imposing fines on Elon Musk and X. We have to protect the children. So you're protecting children, but when somebody tries to do it, then hey, you don't have a right to do any of this. But anyway, that's the ruling, and it's clear that Magyar is being immediately confronted with with the move that he has to play to, and so here we have. The court said in a statement, the contrary to the Hungarian law was contrary to the very identity of the Union as a common legal order in a society in which pluralism prevails. There's no pluralism here. The one thing that the EU is absolutely adamantly against is pluralism. There's no pluralism. Pluralism would mean recognizing the rights of individual states, individual peoples to their own set of values, to their own set of cultural norms. That's what absolutely they say. No, you do not have that right. So that would be the very definition of pluralism. Yeah, Hungary does things one way, whatever, Belgium, Luxembourg do things another way. Germany does it in another way, and so on. No. Everyone does it in exactly the same way, and yet they dress this up. Oh, it's about pluralism. The very exact opposite of what they're against. And of course they dress it up as freedom of speech when it's the very opposite of freedom of speech. Just democracy, where we overturn the decisions, the democratic decisions, democratically arrived at by democratically elected governments. And said common legal order, pluralism prevailed, and that Hungary could not validly rely on its national identity as justification for a law that breached fundamental values. It said it expected Hungary to comply without delay, and it ordered Budapest to pay its costs and those incurred by the European Commission. So that that's going to come out of some of that whatever 20-30 billion or whatever that the EU owes Hungary, the costs of this legal action. Those incurred by the European Commission, which brought the case. And then here we have Politico, exultant today, and here it says the great unblocking. EU foreign minister eyes sweeping changes as Orban exits. And here it says, it's really exciting. A week after Hungary's historic election result, the effects are already being felt. Orban signaled on Sunday that Budapest could remove its veto on the 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine as early as this week, following a visit to Budapest by top European Commission officials, including Ursula von der Leyen's powerful chief of staff, Bjorn Siebert. But the diplomats in Luxembourg said they were looking to clinch further wins, including unblocking the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, new sanctions against violent West Bank settlers that were backed by all EU countries except Hungary, and even the EU's enlargement agenda, which has been stalled partly due to Orban's refusal to consider Ukraine's membership in the bloc. One should say right away that something that isn't mentioned in this article, that if there is now going to, that Hungary does sign on to the 90 billion euro loan, that's because apparently miraculously Ukraine has been able to repair the Druzhba pipeline now that Orban is gone. There's a new government, so he said, yeah, the oil can start flowing very shortly. Well, Orban has already said, well, once the oil starts flowing, we will withdraw our objection to the 90 billion euro loan. But Politico makes no mention of that. It just says, well, hey, now at last Ukraine can get its 90 billion. I don't know whatever is going to happen as a result. Well, they're going to get 90 billion. Orban isn't going to stop it anymore. Well, as was always obvious, the the freeze on the oil deliveries was always about the election in Hungary. It was a way of weakening Orban, and the EU was very much in support of this policy, and they made no serious attempt to investigate what was the condition of the Druzhba pipeline. Why was it impossible for Hungary to receive the oil that it had paid for, and that this dragged on week after week, month after month? The oil that Hungary was supposed to receive, it wasn't getting. And Zelensky each time said, "Well, it's the Druzhba pipeline. I mean, what can we do? I mean, it's just not working." Well, and now the election is over. Well, lo and behold, the Druzhba pipeline is working, and hence uh, the the ban on the 90 billion euro loan. Well, it's now gone. Um, but then this article goes on about all these wonderful things are going. Oh well, now we're going to be able to get Ukraine into the EU. We should also revisit the long block decisions, including opening negotiations with Ukraine. Kaya Kallas told a news conference, also citing sanctions and block funding for Ukraine under the EU's peace facility. One of the EU's diplomats present for closed door discussions between foreign ministers said there was a totally new mood in the room. One after the other, the ministers gave their analysis of the situation. There's a sense that on so many of these files, perhaps now there's a way forward. Some of the diplomats spoken to for the story were granted anonymity. Anyway, so that was this wonderfully exciting news. Now, the LGBTQ issue is obviously is going to be a problem for Magyar, but Magyar can probably get himself out of it by saying, "Well, there's nothing I can do. The EU Court of Justice, the EU's top court, has issued its ruling. I have to abide by it. So I'm going to just go ahead. So, well, okay. I'm going to follow the ruling. I may not like it, but what can I do? The court has ruled, and so he can probably get himself out of that. He's going to have more difficulties on the migration issue because there, he's going to have to. He's going to have to play ball with the EU. I mean, he's going to whether he's going to have to agree to taking more of the migrants. I don't know whether he'll do that, or whether he's going to have to cough up some money for the resettlement fund, or cough up more money for EU strengthening the EU border, or strengthening EU asylum courts, or whatever. I mean, but he's going to have to play along with that. I don't think he can just simply do what Orban did, is saying, we're not doing any of that, because the EU wasn't there to help us, so we're not going to help the EU. I don't think he can do that. But there is a real number of steps that Hungary is going to have to go through, and now the getting yourself off Russian energy will be quite an interesting one because. I mean, obviously, they don't think it can happen overnight. Because after all, Hungary receives its oil and its gas from Russia, but with Anita Orban there, and this was really her signature issue. I mean, this is, as I say, she wrote that book in 2008 about Russian energy imperialism. I mean, the book is not very impressive. You can find it online if you like. You say the book is not very impressive, but it's very much of a piece of the hawks, the European hawks that continuing to buy energy from Russia is to play into Putin's hands and play into Russian imperialism. That's her line of argument. So I think she is obviously going to play along with the EU. Anyway, that's Hungary. Next, the wherever we are on this aborted, or not, we haven't even got to the point of aborted second round of negotiations in Pakistan. Uh, no one seems to be on his en route to Islamabad. So J.D. Vance was supposed to have left on Monday to go to Islamabad. He hasn't done so. No one from Iran has made their way to Islamabad, and so obviously there's some kind of negotiations going on behind the scenes. I think Egypt and Pakistan are trying to persuade all sides to show up, and it doesn't. At the moment, it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but it could well do so. I mean, I think they're going to leave it to the last moment. Yeah, I mean, I think I would stick my neck out and say I still think that there'll be a meeting. I think all round it's generally better to be seen to be negotiating, better to be seen, even if you're being deceitful, even if you're using the negotiations to spin things out, to prepare for the attack. Even then, it's still better to be the one who's negotiating rather than the one who isn't showing up. So that's why I tend to think that it's going to happen. But there have been a number of truths on the part of Trump and sort of tweets from some of the Iranians, none of which is conclusive. I mean, particularly Trump, who's been doing this his flurry. Here we have Israel never talked me into a war with Iran. The results of October the 7th added to my lifelong opinion that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. I watch and read the fake news pundits and polls in total disbelief. 90% of what they say are lies and made up stories, and the polls are rigged, much as the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Just like the results in Venezuela, which the media doesn't like talking about, the results in Iran will be amazing. And if Iran's new leaders' regime change are smart, Iran can have a great and prosperous future. So, bordering on complete meaninglessness is bringing up the 2020 presidential election. Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. We've talked, ad nauseum about what if anything Trump means by that. Anyway, so that's but it's interesting that he brings up Israel, because here he's being very stringently criticized by Tucker Carlson, by Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others were saying, well, it's Israel who's running the U.S. foreign policy. So he has to say, no. I mean, Israel never talked me into it. And then he kind of says that, well, yeah, he did, because somehow the results of October the 7th did. Well, so in other words, the U.S. foreign policy was shaped by the results of October the 7th. Why? I mean, whatever you think of October the 7th, I mean, obviously it was a horrific act. But why is U.S. foreign policy being shaped by what happened on October the 7th? Anyway, here we have Iran has violated the ceasefire numerous times. Well, again, he always seems to be acting kind of defensively. I mean, it's very hard to make the argument Iran has violated the ceasefire numerous times when you have imposed a blockade. A blockade is an act of war during a time when there was a ceasefire in place. So you're imposing a blockade. You're saying everyone can use the Strait of Hormuz with the exception of Iran. Well, I mean, what the hell is that? I mean, other than an act of war. So for him, then he says, "Oh well, Iran has violated the ceasefire a number of times. How has it violated it?" Um, particularly as Iran announced, as we talked about this already a number of times through Arakchi on Friday, it was said the Strait of Hormuz is now open to all shipping. And then Trump immediately said, well, the blockade remains in place. In other words, it's open to all shipping with the exception of Iran shipping. I mean, well, that's a great idea. And then we have another truth by Trump. Operation Midnight Hammer was a complete and total obliteration of nuclear dust sites in Iran. Therefore, digging it out will be a long and difficult process. Fake news, CNN, and other corrupt media networks and platforms fail to give our great aviators the credit they deserve, always trying to demean and belittle losers. So again, why are we talking about Operation Midnight Hammer when you launched a brand new war against Iran 8 months later, and therefore, in effect, you were admitting that Operation Midnight Hammer was completely pointless. And then Trump says, never allow traitor Democrats like low IQ person Hakeem Jeffries or crying Chuck Schumer or the totally corrupt fake news media such as the phony and decaying Wall Street Journal, the failing New York Times, subscriptions way down, or dying 60 Minutes to demean or criticize Operation Midnight Hammer, which totally obliterated nuclear dust location to the point where bloodthirsty Iran has been unable to get to it or dig it out. Space Force has cameras on every inch of the three sites that were so brilliantly hit last June. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So again, you can see how he's sort of really upset. He's upset about the claims that Israel is running U.S. foreign policy. He's now upset about the claims that Operation Midnight Hammer was totally pointless. And then Trump again to the Iranian leaders who will soon be in negotiations with my representatives. See, this is where Trump just makes stuff up. When we can see where there are no negotiations. I mean, what negotiation? But it's obvious he's doing this in order to manipulate the markets, because as soon as he says who will soon be in negotiations with my representatives, well, right away the markets recover and oil prices immediately go down. Well, the negotiations are going to take place soon. I would greatly appreciate the release of these women. I'm sure they will respect the fact that you did so. This is they being his negotiators. Please do them no harm. Would be a great start to our negotiations. Thank you for your attention. So, who are these women? What women are we talking about? You know, it says, and then he says, this is some guy. No, who we have no idea who this person is. Some student, according to the Twitter. Il Jacobi sort of published this these pictures of 8 women. It says, breaking: the Islamic Republic is preparing to hang 8 women. Just like that, just preparing to hang 8 women. Not a word from the international community or so-called human rights organization. We have no idea anyway who these 8 women are, hanged for what. Just makes this stuff up. I said, oh no, nothing about from the International Human Rights Organization. Well, I mean, where's the evidence? I mean, who said that they're going to hang? Was there a court ruling? Has anyone announced that they're going to be hanging? No, you just. But Trump retweeted this, or rather, retruthed this, and put that inscription about, oh, you know, you have to. How did Trump put it? I would greatly appreciate the release of these women. I am sure they will respect the fact that you did so. Anyway, here is Ghalibaf, who led is a speaker of the Iranian parliament, led the negotiations in Islamabad. It says Trump, by imposing a siege and violating the ceasefire, seeks to turn this negotiating table, in his own imagination, into a table of surrender, or to justify renewed warmongering. Well, I think that's right. We do not accept negotiations under the shadow of threats. And in the past 2 weeks, we have prepared to reveal new cards on the battlefield. So this is where he brings up that Iran has some new cards to play on the battlefield. We don't know if that's true. But anyway, that he's promising some new, whatever, new weapons, new strategy. We don't know. And then the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, honoring commitments is the basis of meaningful dialogue. Deep historical mistrust in Iran towards the U.S. conduct remains, while unconstructive and contradictory signals from American officials carry a bitter message. They seek Iran's surrender. Iranians do not submit to force. And then it says, adherence to commitments is the logic that justifies any kind of dialogue. In addition to the deep historical distrust in Iran toward the background of the US government's behavior and performance, the non-constructive and contradictory approach of US officials in recent days carries a bitter message. They seek Iran's surrender. The people of Iran will not bow to coercion. And then we have the Tasnim news agency, which is obviously the mouthpiece of the IRGC, says, with the ceasefire deadline approaching, and U.S. maritime blockades blocking renewed negotiations, Iran has fully prepared for the possible resumption of war, readying new surprises for a potential new phase of conflict. So they repeat the point made by Ghalibaf about the surprises. And then Arakchi, just within the last hour, sent out this truth. Blockading Iranian ports is an act of war and thus a violation of the ceasefire. Striking a commercial vessel and taking its crew hostage is an even greater violation. Iran knows how to neutralize restrictions, how to defend its interests, and how to resist bullying. All right, so, and at the moment, there's no evidence of any move for a meeting. And Trump announced that the ceasefire has been extended to Wednesday evening. So, as things stood, I think at least yesterday, it looked very much as if the ceasefire was going to end at sort of midnight tonight. Well, that's not that. Apparently, that's not going to happen. It's now been extended through to extension through to next to Wednesday. That's it's a Wednesday. He said it to in an interview with Bloomberg, and so that's so. But that's still Wednesday, and as things stand, it's the ceasefire ends sometime on Wednesday, and just checking because one always has to check with Trump, if there's any latest announcements. Okay, here's let me just here's a statement. Here's an announcement, and I will read it out. I will read out this announcement, and let me just. All right. So, based is a statement of President Trump. I'll read it out. Based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other. Okay, so let's read that again. Upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we have been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other. All right, so um, what that means that okay, then Trump isn't going to unleash anything Wednesday as he threatened to do, but he's maintaining the blockade. Now the blockade is obviously um, unacceptable to Iran, but there's probably there. But Iran has obviously many different ways to get around the blockade. I don't think that Iran will be the one to begin shooting. So just in terms of who's going to do some shooting, I don't think Iran will do some shooting. But it also depends on how sternly the United States will attempt to enforce the blockade. Because if they start seizing ships um, in the high seas, seizing Iranian tankers or ships heading to Iranian ports or ships anywhere, anything that has an Iranian origin, if they start seizing them, then may well be that Iran will just say, well, that's it. We're not adhering to the ceasefire. So I think it was always um, likely that somehow Trump will try to get himself out of the this mess that he's in. But it does really, you know, get to the issue. What happens afterwards? Because okay, he can move more U.S. forces into the region in preparation for whatever, some major military operation, and I'm sure he's engaged in doing just that. That's very high risk. Um, but unless he's willing to negotiate something, and it doesn't look like he's willing to negotiate anything at the moment. I mean, we're getting ready for the second round of negotiations. It's not going to happen now. Then you can just, I mean, you know, the blockade isn't going to bring Iran to heel. I mean, that isn't going to is so he's either going to have to negotiate something, down the road, or he's going to have to undertake this serious, dangerous military operation. But he obviously wanted to get himself out of this the problem that he was in, which is to launch this bombing campaign, which was clearly not going at all well, not at all popular in the United States, certainly very unpopular around the world. And for him to start bombing again, and then Iran starts attacking the Gulf kingdoms. That was a bad move. So he's essentially got himself out of this, but is still kicking the can down the road because he's still going to have to either negotiate something or launch this military campaign that he obviously doesn't want to do. He's a quick in and out person, and an invasion of Iran is definitely not a quick in and out undertaking. Okay, so that's that's that. There's one other um, issue that I wanted to bring up. Well, before I bring up, let's go to our locals page and so address some of the questions and comments of Gagglers. The people who maintain maintain the community, the people who ensure that the dogs are fed and reasonably contented. So this is, and as I always say, every time we do our live stream, if you want to ask me a question, if you want to address your comments, please join our community. We've great people here, who are really, really smart people, really knowledgeable, learned people, and it's a great community. And so, please join. It doesn't cost very much, and you certainly won't regret it. There's constant material, fresh material that's posted here on the Gaggle. So join the community, the gaggle.locals.com. So, and I can guarantee that you will not regret joining. Anyway, but if so as I say, if you wanted me to address your questions, then please join us. Anyway, so here's the Gaggle community. First question from Danaki, one of our earliest members, and one of our most prolific posters. And Tanaki says, forget about Cuba, Venezuela, and whatnot, where more or less credible excuses can be invoked. What about the likes of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, or even Belarus cozying up to NATO and the US? You have to be a really stupid, dumb fuck at this stage to still listen to BS artists, spook informants, and grifters like Escobar singing odes of praise to the name of multipolarity, Ruski Mir, and the rising global south, dedicated to whiny morons Zaharova or out of touch dinosaur Lavrov. Okay, tell us what you really think. Okay, yeah, I think it's when you look at this the diplomatic situation for the multi-polaristas, it's not terribly favorable. One only has to look back to let's go back to the early years of the of President Putin, and at that time. Russia, even though it was still reeling from the Yeltsin years, it maintained a maintained itself as a major global power. Definitely not on the equal of the United States. Definitely not on the same level as the Soviet Union was, but still, um, that that region which would comprise the Soviet Union, the Commonwealth of Independent States, that was under the domination of Russia. Russia determined what happened in the near abroad, and they, it obviously it lost the three Baltic states, but they themselves were not that significant. I mean, yes, there were important real estate, and once they were swallowed up into NATO, then that was that was a problem. Um, but it was the loss of the Baltic states was almost inevitable after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Russia maintained everything else. So all of these the members of that the Commonwealth of Independent States, which were most of the Soviet Union, and there was all that the Collective Security Treaty Organization. There was the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and so on. So the Eurasian Union, and so it seemed like Russia was building an alternative uh, grouping of powers, something that was going to be may turn out to be significant, a significant challenge to Western hegemony. Now look at today. The these states you've just mentioned, Armenia, Azerbaijan, have now pretty much been lost to Russia, which is quite amazing. I mean, that was Armenia, Azerbaijan together, with the Transcaucasian Federation, was one of the earliest members of the Soviet Union. Basically, now they're gone from Russia. They're basically completely um, oriented towards NATO. Um, I mean, Russia may still hope that, oh well, Pashinyan's going to lose an election, and they're going to be back in Armenia. None of that is going to happen. I don't think Pashinyan's going to lose the election. I think Armenia is already gone. Azerbaijan is gone, and Kazakhstan is getting less and less friendly towards Russia. And then you bring up Belarus. Belarus, I think, probably will. I mean, Belarus is so vulnerable that I think it will have to stay aligned with Russia. But it's not wholly um, beyond the realm of imagination that Belarus could also be lost. That Belarus could be the next Ukraine. I didn't think that Ukraine would be lost. I mean, I think when we sort of, as I say, look back 20 years ago, yeah, there was the Orange Revolution. That obviously wasn't very favorable towards Russia, but Ukraine was still somehow, aligned more or less geopolitically with Russia, and then of course with the return to power of Viktor Yanukovych in 2010, then things seem to be looking better for Russia. Um, you'd have to say, that one after another, Russia has lost its key allies in the world. I mean, this Bashar al-Assad is gone, Maduro is gone, Iran is under attack. Iran has given a very good account of itself, but that's really up to Iran. It's what Iran has been able to accomplish. I mean, I don't think anyone has really claimed that somehow it was Russia that's responsible for Iran's resilience, or China. Come to that, everything we've gathered so far is that China has been, um, kind of taking a fairly neutral stance on this war, and has more or less been urging Iran to accommodate itself to the demands of the United States. So you when you talk about how this the champions of Russia would tell us incidentally how fantastically well everything is happening. Well, the the world is not particularly um, well ordered for Russia right now, and more seriously, I mean, even all of that can be rectified if Russia were to finally bring this war in Ukraine to a successful conclusion. But there we got a real problem. because this war in Ukraine is nowhere near it's the end, because the Russia still has not taken um, the whole of Donetsk, hasn't taken the whole of Kherson and Zaporozhye, and the problem for Russia is that eh, the West knows exactly what its strategy is. The West knows exactly what it's trying to do. So, in anticipation of that, it's actually strengthening the fortifications in Slavyansk and Kramatorsk in Donetsk. So, taking those um, strategic points is going to be a huge undertaking for Russia. That's not just going to be an easy walk in the park. Hasn't done it. I mean, it obviously hasn't been able to pull it off for the more than 4 years that this war has been going on. Um, and worst of all is that this should have been the time when Russia should have just wrapped it up. The United States is really seriously preoccupied with Iran. It's got a difficult problem on its hands with Iran. Now's the time, and then the Europeans are at sixes and sevens. They don't know what to do. They have to follow the United States. At the same time, they're more preoccupied with Ukraine. But basically, there isn't anything to deliver for Ukraine because the United States is, wants everything for the Persian Gulf. So this is the time, if you're a Russian leader, this is the time to wrap it up, bring it to an end, present the world with a fait accompli, and then that's all there is to it. But instead, it doesn't seem as if anything is heading towards a successful conclusion. Because sooner or later, that war with Iran is going to come to an end, and then the full might of the US and the EU will be directed at Russia as it was before. And then things are going to get very difficult again, because then the United States will again reimpose sanctions against Russia and will once again start encouraging Ukraine to attack strategic targets inside Russia. So this has been a fairly good time. Basically, the United States has lifted sanctions against Russia. The United States has been telling Ukraine, don't hit oil refineries and oil storage depots in Russia. This is not the right time to do it. So if they're not doing that, then this is the time to get this war out of the way. But it hasn't happened. So yes, so yeah, I'm kind of I'm at a loss to explain how this is. I'm at a loss of people who are blithely optimistic after all this time. But anyway, thank you, Danaki, and the Danaki goes on. Since we are talking about Bulgaria and allegedly fake pro Russian and anti EU parties, would you agree that, even though much cooler now than 20 years ago, if given a clear choice of stay or hung exit, both from EU and NATO, Hungarians would unequivocally vote to stay despite their grievances? It would certainly be true for Bulgaria and Romania at all. Yeah, I agree. And I think that was always Orban's problem, namely that he could rail against the EU. He could denounce Brussels. He would against the sanctions policy. He was against the Ukraine policy, against the LGBTQ policy, the immigration policy, the woke policy. This is a regular thing for Orban. But fundamentally, Hungarians do not want to leave the EU, and Hungarians don't want to leave NATO. And so, while whatever Orban's own beliefs may have been, he may well have thought Hungary would be better off outside of the EU. I think Hungary would be a lot better off outside the EU. But however much he may have thought it, Hungarians would not support him. And in the end, he failed to explain to Hungarians how these constant fights with the EU bureaucracy was improving their lives. How so? They say, hey, well, if we're going to be in the EU, if we're going to stay in the EU, and obviously you've told us over and over again that we're going to remain in the EU. So if we have to stay in the EU, then why can't we just follow the club rules? And I think that's where the problems arose for Orban, because then Orban sometimes said, "Well, yeah, we're going to stay in the EU, but we don't like the club rules." Well, it's fairly obvious. If you're going to be a member of a club, you have to follow its rules. If you don't like its rules, if you don't like what this club stands for, you don't like their principles, their goals, then you have to leave. And Hungary, I think, should have left, but it didn't. The Hungarians wanted to stay, and therefore Hungarians ultimately were just baffled by these daily fights that Orban was having with the EU, when they knew that Orban really isn't going to leave the EU. So, yeah, then inevitably the Hungarians were going to vote for the politician who said, "I'm going to have better relations with the EU." I said, "Well, okay, well, great, we'll have better relations." So I think you're right to saying, however much Hungarians hate all this LGBTQ stuff, however much they hate the idea of men playing in women's sports, however much they hate immigrants. I mean, that's something Hungarians really hate. Immigrants. They hate the idea of leaving the EU even more, and I think that was the, the fundamental contradiction at the heart of Orbanism. Anyway, thank you so much, Danaki. And then Stone River. Thank you so much, Stone River, for your generosity. So Stone River says, doesn't domestic politics being hotly contested among multiple competing interests undercut the notion of there being a national interest? Well, I don't know really, because I think they're normally, when we talk about the national interest, I mean, particularly on the question of foreign policy, then generally there's a agreement among most, well, not necessarily all, but among most political parties, that there is a national interest. Now, I mean, it's not often that the foreign policy is hotly contested in democratic countries. I mean, we're getting a little bit of that in the United States, but even when you have a kind of an argument about, let's say right now, the war with Iran among Democrats and Republicans, that there's no real difference, but basically among most Democrats, among most Republicans, about the desirability of crushing Iran. Let's put it like that: crushing Iran, destroying it, eliminating it as a state. There's no real argument about that. So what are they arguing about? Well, they're arguing about, Trump. How has Trump gone about it? I think it's quite ridiculous that the position of both the Democrats and Republicans is. I think it's a totally ridiculous view, but nonetheless, the argument, what's dividing both sides, is Trump. The Democrats don't think Trump is doing the right thing. The moment, let's say, Trump were to go to Pakistan, and he were to sign some kind of an agreement with Iran, whatever's in that agreement, non-aggression treaty, or, lifting sanctions, whatever. The Democrats would immediately unleash a torrent of abuse against Trump that he's selling out the United States to Iran. Um, now that there would then be much more hawkish on Iran than Trump is. Um, and in, while if Trump were then to resume the bombing of Iran, they would be attacking Trump for bringing instability to the Persian Gulf. So that's also they would be against it. So it's really just simply they're quibbling about Trump opposing whatever Trump at any moment um, favors. Now, again, but going back to the issue of so anyway, that just tells me that there's a foreign policy consensus. There's a foreign policy consensus in Hungary. Foreign policy, which is, hey, we don't leave the EU. Um, and what's a foreign policy consensus in the United Kingdom? A foreign policy consensus, however much we dislike Donald Trump, we cannot go against the United States. We always have to stick with the United States. That's a fundamental. Now, we can we can argue about what's the national interest, but but if we have these kinds of arguments, these when you talk about these intense arguments within domestic politics, um, they usually these are partisan fights, but they're very rarely about fundamentals. So as I say, in the United States, it's very rare for an argument about fundamentals. So let's just imagine the United States. Fundamental would be: is the United States pursuing its agenda, or is it pursuing an Israeli agenda? Okay, well, the people who argue about this, they're kind of an interesting group, but they're basically a minority faction within the United States. They argue about the interesting fundamental questions, but that's not really where most of the argument is. There's basically an agreement, among the U.S. U.S. foreign policy elites, among both parties, that it is in the U.S. national interest to wage some kind of a war against Iran. It is fundamentally agreed by all parties in the United Kingdom that you can't fall out too much with the United States. Fundamentally agreement among Hungarians, you cannot leave the EU. So the rest are just these partisan interests. But but basically, when it comes to what is defined as the national interest, what normally is understood, well, there often really isn't that much of an argument about that. Rightly or wrongly, there's invariably a consensus. Often foolish, but there's a consensus of what is the national interest. But nonetheless, I mean, it is an interesting concept. Like we talk about the national interest, as if it's something that is self-evident, but it's only self-evident in the sense that there is a consensus on what is the national interest. Anyway, thank you, Stone River, and then Cynthia. Always very good to see you here, Cynthia. Cynthia, a resident film scholar and film expert with an encyclopedic knowledge of the history of cinema. Always catch her comments and observations and insights and aesthetic judgments on our locals board, and she provides us with really, really interesting commentary on the films that we screen on the Gaggle. And this week we have the screening of another one in our series on liars, big lies, and the the lying liars who perpetrate them. Anyway, we have a screening of Billy Liar. It's a very much a film of its time. In a way, it's a museum piece, but a very interesting museum piece. If you want to understand, well, first, obviously, the British cinema of that time, the early 1960s, absolutely watch Billy Liar, but also to have some understanding of the social changes that were taking place in Britain at that time, and the new Britain that was emerging from the post-war Britain. See Billy Liar. I think and I think in all of these issues that I've just mentioned, Cynthia provides really interesting insight. So watch Billy Liar. Another reason to join the Gaggle. Watch Billy Liar and read Cynthia's really interesting commentary that accompanies it. Anyway, so here's Cynthia says the United States is tapping Ukraine's battle hardened drone technology and personnel to counter Iran in the Middle East, effectively extending the Ukraine war's expertise into another theater. With Russia closely aligned with Iran and still at war with Ukraine, the question is hard to ignore. Does this move risk provoking Moscow into escalating, whether doubling down on support for Iran or by edging closer to a direct confrontation with the United States? Well, it's a very interesting question. Yes, Iran is absolutely going to be involved in this war. Ukraine is absolutely going to be involved in this war against Iran. Zelensky has been absolutely insisting that, hey, make use of us, make use of our expertise, and particularly on on the question of the drone technology. Um, Obviously, the drones have completely revolutionized warfare, so it does make sense to make make use of Ukraine's expertise, and Ukraine's huge drone production capability. I mean, Ukraine's now one of the biggest drone producers in the world. But of course, the problem with drones is that Iran is able to produce them as well, and Iran is also quite effective in in the way it uses drone technology. Now, you have mutual destruction that can be expected there. The and neither side, and neither Russia has been neither Russia nor Ukraine has been able to stop the other side from continuing to produce and deploy drones. They're very inexpensive. They're not hard to produce, and they are quite effective in as defensive warfare. Fundamentally, they prevent um, armies to mount offensives. I think it's the Ukraine's drone technology that has prevented any major Russian advances over the past 2-3 years. So they're very effective weapons. Now, is Russia going to get involved in Iran? No, I don't think so. I think Russia's got enough on its plate in Ukraine. I think uh, yes, Russia obviously has an interest in trying to tie down the United States. I mean, that's a given. And so, therefore, anything that makes life more difficult for the United States then would be good for Russia. And, very much in the same way that the United States is very happy to inflict pain and damage on Russia. So, anything that's damaging to Russia is good for the United States. So that's a given. What how what Russia, on the other hand, has to consider is to what extent do they still want to work something out with the Trump administration? And here we get into this really murky area when it's not entirely clear how Russia sees the outcome, how it sees the conclusion of this war in Ukraine, because yes, Russia said, well, we can just go on and on until we finally take all of the Donbass and so on. They could do that, but there is an alternative, and that is if Trump can be persuaded to pressure Ukraine into conceding territory, and then that would be a settlement. I mean, particularly if they can be made to concede on the Donbass, not so much on Kherson and Zaporozhye, but at least on the Donbass. Then I think Russia has made clear that would suffice to bring this war to an end, and then Russia would walk away and say, "Okay, well, we did accomplish something through this war. We now have the Donbass." For that, they do need Trump. So Trump can make it easier for them, or then the war could drag on for another 2-3 years, which I don't think Russia really wants. So that raises the question: how much does Russia want to antagonize President Trump? I get the impression that they don't want to do it. So I get the impression that Russia has essentially maintained good relations, certainly diplomatic support for Iran, has generally taken the side of Iran. At the United Nations, Iran has been attacked by the Israel and the United States, but I don't get the sense that Russia has provided any real material assistance to Iran. I think whatever Iran has achieved through its targeting, through its conception of this asymmetric warfare, all of that has been Iran's. These are all Iran's accomplishments. I don't think Russia played much of a role in that at all. So Ukraine getting involved in Iran may on the one hand be a good thing for Russia, because then Ukraine is kind of preoccupying itself in Iran, and therefore it's not able to do it's going to be able to do less in Ukraine. On the other hand, Ukraine has already been quite preoccupied in fighting the Russians in Africa. So surprisingly, this distraction hasn't in any way detracted from Ukraine fighting against the Russians. So Ukraine is able to fight against Russia, targeting Russian forces in Africa. I think Ukraine will be fighting, or at least providing some drone advice or drone technology in against Iran. But that I don't think that in any way kind of will be persuasive for Russia to do much about that. I think I don't think it's going to weaken Ukraine in any way by getting by these distractions, and I don't think that Russia will get involved. I think Russia really has its hands full with its war to to allow itself to get, get involved in this Persian Gulf War. Now, I think there may be some way down the road when there's some kind of serious negotiations between the United States and Iran, maybe Russia could play a role there. Maybe in the question of handing over some of the enriched uranium or digging up if some of the enriched uranium. I think Russia could play a role there. But I really don't think Russia wants to get involved. It's you know it's, it's very busy, to say the least, in Iran. I'm sorry, very busy in Ukraine, and it doesn't want to do anything to antagonize Trump. Because I think it sees Trump as a way of ending this war in Ukraine. So anyway, I don't think it's I think it's there's there's not going to be a direct confrontation with the United States. I mean, it could happen um, eventually, but to be honest, if there is to be a direct confrontation with the United States over, well, I think over anything. I mean, whether it's Ukraine or whether over Iran, I think that's going to happen after Trump leaves office. As I'm kind of pessimistic generally about the war in Ukraine. I don't think it's coming to a conclusion anytime soon. I don't think it's going to end during Trump's years in power. And then if the Democrats return in 2029, I think then there could be an escalation. I think the Democrats are much more hostile to Russia than Trump is. I think really Trump has never been particularly hostile to Russia. But I think if there is to be an escalation against Russia, it will take place under the auspices of a Democratic administration. I think that's when there might be a dangerous confrontation. I think with Trump, I think he's going to minimize the need for a confrontation. And he said it himself. He has no interest in any dangerous confrontations with Russia. Anyway, so Cynthia then goes on. Why did a U.S. warship disable the Iranian vessel before seizing it? Crippling the ship seems counterproductive. Towing it to port is costly, and the repairs will be more so. Taken intact, the vessel would have been far more valuable as a prize of war. Moreover, seizing a commercial vessel will only drive up already high insurance premiums, even further across all maritime traffic, including allied shipping. At what point does the strategy get recognized as costing more than it achieves? Well, I think that they what Trump is doing generally now is, I mean, he's seen that the bombing is not working, and it isn't working because, well, on the most obvious level, generally bombing rarely achieves the political goals. I mean, so it's just basically you can hit any number of strategic targets, but you can't compel surrender, and even if you start just explicitly targeting civilians, still isn't going to compel surrender. So therefore Trump had a decision to make. He can either work on a negotiated outcome, go to Islamabad, work something out with Iran, or again escalate, hitting civilians, creating environmental damage, and raising enormous outrage around the world, even outrage in the United States, or he does what he thinks is a kind of the softer option, but which might have more likely of successful outcomes, namely a blockade. So that's why I think he chose, a rather than negotiated outcome. Then he may be seen to be a loser. Bombing, that's he's tried that hasn't worked. Okay, so now he's going to do the um, the blockade, and so and beyond the blockade, seizing commercial vessels and thereby teaching the Iranians a lesson, showing, hey, we mean business. Um, I don't think that's going to result in a favorable outcome for the United States. I think Iran has all sorts of ways of getting around the a blockade. I think that the notion that their economy is going to grind to a halt, I don't think it's happened. I think they have ways of getting around it through land routes, through islands that they use for oil storage. So I think they're going to get around it. But I think that's what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to intimidate them and thinking, hey, you're facing complete economic standstill, and that this is going to hurt you a lot more than the bombing did. Because the problem for the United States was during the bombing was that Iran kept inflicting damage to its Gulf allies, and we've seen now that essentially the UAE has gone to the United States and said, "Hey, we need to bail out." I mean, this is basically. I mean, that's a story today in the Wall Street Journal. The UAE has said to the United States, we need a bailout. We're in desperate straits, and I think if the UAE is in desperate straits, then you have to, Qatar, Kuwait, all of them are going to be in trouble as a result of this war. So that's why I think Trump has decided to go for, um, trying to strangle Iran economically. Um, Now, but you're right in the sense that the effect of that will be to raise oil prices, obviously. But Trump seems to have figured out a way of, of dealing with this, which I don't know how long he can do it, but he's figured out that the way to deal with the oil price issue is to keep saying that we're very close to an agreement. And he's been doing that. He keeps saying we're very close to an agreement. Just 90% of the issues have been agreed upon, and immediately oil prices come down. Um, and the same thing goes with the insurance premiums. Okay, well, hey, there's a problem with raising insurance premiums, and so, but it's saying, hey, we're very close to a deal. So there's a limit to how long you can go on doing this, but that seems to be the Trumpian way. I mean, he just keeps kicking the can down the road and hoping that something or other is going to work out. So anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then we have Vic Shakopoulos. This says, where are we? Yep. Vic says, Dear George, are you familiar with Eduard Limonov? If so, what do you think of his work and life and legacy? Have you read his biography of Emmanuel Carrère or watched the 2024 film loosely based on it? I know a little about him. I can't say that I know that much. I mean, he's an interesting figure. I mean, these Russian nationalists are interesting. Now, I'm always, to be honest, I'm always a little skeptical about Russian nationalists, as I was of Serbian nationalists. There's always the person who is more nationalist than thou, the one who's always at the forefront of fighting for his nation. He's the one who's probably going to be the first to sell out. I'm not saying that that's true about him, but you kind of, you know, being a great nationalist, a great patriot, that's fine. Um, but when you extol it and when you make this into a cult, and when you start making a completely unreasonable demands and raise completely unreasonable expectations, then you kind of wonder what's the real agenda here, and what are you hoping really to accomplish? And interesting, Limonov had also kind of was a great enthusiast for Serbian nationalism, and I think the Serbian nationalists were also very foolish and naive and were easily manipulated by the West, because then they were essentially manipulated and made use of against the more reasonable, more pragmatic politicians such as Milosevic, and so and they were used. Oh, hey, Milosevic is selling out the Serbs. He's not a real Serb nationalist. He's against Serbian nationalism. Well, no, he was just somebody who was understand. He just understood what what was achievable and what wasn't achievable. And the nationalists often just don't do that. And so when they start attacking the more reasonable politician, no, you're selling out the nation. Lo and behold, they accomplish nothing, and they're actually the ones who um, the ones who are the quickest to sell out. And that's why I've been somewhat skeptical about the Russian nationalists, who are, also they they're ready to take up the fight, but these things are to on behalf of goals that are really not achievable. So so I kind of much prefer the more moderate, the more pragmatic kind of nationalist, who rather than the more nationalist than thou type. Much like the more socialist, more communist than thou. The one who's always in the forefront of completely unrealistic, unachievable goals, and that actually the end result of which is you discredit your own cause. You don't achieve anything, and you've discredited your own cause. And I think, as I said, he was a big champion of Serbian nationalists, and I think the Serbian nationalists really did discredit their own cause. But I can't say I'm wholly an expert on it. Those are just my initial impressions of him. But I'll take another look and come back to you on that. And then Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for joining us. Anne Marie, of course, are a great and renowned, internationally musical practitioner, wonderful violinist, performs currently and has performed in some of the most distinguished orchestras in the world, and she's always here to grace us with her great knowledge and expertise and familiarity with all of the intricacies of classical music and the performance of classical music. And by a stroke of good fortune, today I posted our latest contribution to the Gaggle Music Club, namely Bruckner's Fifth Symphony. And I think everybody, again, Gagglers can listen to it, enjoy the the work. It's a very interesting piece of work. I wrote a kind of a short introduction to it. So read my introduction, see what you think. Whether you agree, you disagree. And I'm hoping, that when Anne Marie was very busy because she has so many major musical commitments that she has to fulfill. But I'm hoping that if Anne Marie has a moment, she could at least say a few words about whether Bruckner's Symphony Number 5 or whether Bruckner's work generally. I'd really be very, very interested Anne Marie's observations on Bruckner. Anyway, thank you so much, Anne Marie, as always, for your generosity. Thank you for all of your contributions to the Gaggle. And I was hoping, but I think my time is now up. I was hoping to talk about something, but which I'm going to talk about it next time. That uh, that someone says here, I thought Peter wrote that. I've been writing these things for years. And you say, I thought Peter wrote that. Okay. Anyway, but I was hoping to get before the end, but it's a kind of a big subject, so I don't really have time to open it up. But I'll give a taste for the Thursday live stream, and that is the interesting debate that has now taken place in France between two presidential contenders. On the one side, we have Dominique de Villepin, who I think many people will remember as the, um, the French foreign minister at the time of the Iraq War, who kind of became briefly an international celebrity by very vigorously and vehemently opposing the U.S. Invasion of Iraq. So that's but Dominic, and then Dominic de Villepin, he ran for president very, very weakly and very unsuccessfully in 2012. But apparently he's now gearing up for one last attempt at the presidency for 2027. And so he's in one corner, and then in the other corner is Eric Zemmour, about whom we talked briefly about during the last French presidential election. He's this right-wing nationalist. He's not part of Marine Le Pen's party. He has his own political party, but he's his way of thinking is close to that of Le Pen. But anyway, they've got themselves into an interesting argument about colonialism, and in a presidential debate in France, you say, well, why are they arguing about colonialism? What's the reason for that? Because there are no more colonies. Well, France does have a very substantial Muslim population. I mean, you got 10, 12% of France is Muslim, and therefore that is a big, major voting bloc. And clearly that Villepin is making a pitch for that. He's offered this critique of colonialism, very lengthy, and we can talk about that. As I say, it's worth going into, and then to this critique of colonialism, Eric Zemmour has raised some objections, which I think is also quite interesting. We should go into it, but there's no time for it now. So that's a taste, a foretaste of what we'll talk about a little bit on Thursday. Dominique de Villepin versus Eric Zemmour. And Eric Zemmour is, if you recall, he's of course himself Jewish, but he's a controversialist. And one of his interesting theses, for which he got a lot of criticism, but he has an interesting mind, was that he thought that the case that Alfred Dreyfus was indeed guilty is pretty strong. It's by no means a slam dunk that Alfred Dreyfus was innocent and that he was framed by anti-Semitic France. So that he presented that argument, which is quite interesting. Anyway, it is there's a preview of what we'll talk about on Thursday, and doubtless there'll be other topics. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you above all for those who, you know, took pity on the dogs and knew how how upset they are, depressed, and so on. So thank you to everyone who contributed to the tip jar, and thank you obviously for all of your comments and questions. We'll be back Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, all the best.